So when we left off on Tuesday, we had done 1 and 2. So we're on number 3. So we covered the whole chapter, the PowerPoint anyway. So we talked about now we're doing process costing. So in order to follow cost flows through process costing, in order to assign cost to each inventory, we have to calculate equivalent units of production. So we did that in the first problem, and then we looked at allocating factory overhead, which again, as far as this chapter goes, allocating overhead, you calculate applied overhead the same way. Now you just have to calculate it for each work in process inventory account. So that's really the only difference there. And number 3 is dealing with the journal entries, which again, you're going to see, you know, a lot of the journal entries are very familiar from last chapter, but we just have more than one work in process. So we're going to see more journal entries moving from one work in process to the next work in process. But as far as your overall flow from materials to work in process to finished goods to cost of goods sold, that flow is still the same. We're just breaking work in process up into multiple inventory accounts. So let's look at this. So Domino Foods manufactures a sugar product. Oh, I thought they made pizza, right? By a continuous process involving 3 production departments. They have refining, sifting, and packing. So we have 3 work in process. Assume that records indicate direct materials, direct labor, and applied factory overhead for the first department, refining, were $400,000, $150,000, and $100,000 respectively. Work in process and refining at the beginning of the period totaled $40,000, and work in process at the end was $35,000. So it says journalize the entries to record the flow of costs into the refining department for materials, labor, and overhead. Okay. So again, you know, you're really just moving now into a work in process for refining. So we're going to have more than one work in process account. Our first one is refining. Well, it's still just a general work in process account. And they kind of show us, you know, we had a beginning balance of 40,000. And then during the period, we added in all of our production costs. So we had direct materials of 400,000. Direct labor of 150,000, and factory overhead applied of 100,000. And then it even gives us our ending balance was 35,000. Okay, so this is for refining. This is our first work in process. So we know materials, you know, flew in from materials. You know, our direct materials came from the materials account. And then labor, we would debit work in process and credit, you know, wages payable, and then overhead would go to overhead. So basically I just gave you all the journal entries, right? Yeah, it's that easy. But it's the same cost flow, okay? So we have work in process refining. This is the same as last chapter. We are just adding more than one work in process. So your journal entries, the only difference is instead of just saying work in process, I want to say work in process refining. Okay. So number 1, when we're journalizing materials coming in, make this bigger, we're going to debit work in process refining for those direct materials of 400,000. And what would I credit? Not 4 million. Do what? Materials. Very good. Materials. So again, the only difference is classifying which work in process. The second one is for labor. So again, still debiting work in process refining. And what do I credit there? Wages payable. Perfect. And then the third one is dealing with overhead. So again, factory overhead, we debited work in process. I put the wrong one there. Work in process. There we go. A debit work in process refining. And what do I credit? Overhead. Very good. And again, the difference there is we have factory overhead for the refining department. So again, your journal entries are the same. You're just adding specific work in process to it. Okay. Part B, it says journalized entry to record the transfer of production costs to the second department, sifting. So now we have work in process sifting. Well, how do I know what costs go to sifting? How would I figure that out?
You take the beginning balance from refining, the beginning balance from sifting, and then the ending balance.
And well, we don't have a beginning balance for sifting.
You would take all of your balances for the materials, the labor, and the factory overhead, and you would subtract the end balance?
Good. You'd add in this too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. We don't know anything in sifting, and we really don't need to until we move to the next process. But yeah, we just want to balance this refining. So what we're looking for is what was transferred. This is what was transferred to sifting. So it's the same as, you know, when we were working from work in process to finished goods, we're just balancing our T account. So yeah, we're going to add up, we're going to take beginning balance plus all of our production costs and subtract out that ending balance. So how many costs were transferred to sifting? How much? Perfect. Yeah, 655,000. Good. Okay. So again, you're just balancing T accounts. It's just that we have more than one work in process account. So it looks a little bit different, but the flow is really still the same. When you're trying to transfer costs out, you're just balancing T accounts. Okay. So there, I'm debiting work in process sifting department because it's coming into sifting, and I'm crediting work in process refining, 655,000. And then, you know, we could keep going with this. We'd have a beginning and an ending balance. We would add in more possibly materials, labor, and overhead, and we would balance that one, and it would go into the next, the packing. And then from packing, that would go to finished goods. Any questions on those? It's really, again, you know, the same cost flow assumptions. We're just moving from a work in process to a work in process. Okay. Well, our last one's our big, long, fun one. But then we're finished. So this last one's doing the full cost of production report. So this is going to give us all the information we need, and we're going to have to do equivalent units. We're going to have to do cost per equivalent unit. Then we're going to have to assign costs to each department. Okay. So, or not each department, but we assign costs to beginning inventory, what was started and completed, and ending inventory. So remember, with the cost of production report, that's our goal for each work in process account. We want to find out our cost to assign to beginning inventory, what was started and completed in the period, and ending inventory. Okay. So they tell us the cutting department of Karachi Carpet Company provided the following data for January. Assume that all materials are added at the beginning of the process. So materials are 100% complete at the beginning. So work in process January 1, we have 1,400 units that are 75% completed, and they give us our total cost. They give us direct materials. These are the actual costs that we paid. Okay, just FYI. So direct materials and conversion. And that's how we're getting that total work in process cost. During the month, we added 58,000 units of materials into the weaving department, and there's our costs. And we have labor and overhead for the month. And obviously we can see we need to calculate a few things, okay? So they give us everything we need. So it says, prepare a cost of production report for the cutting department. If an amount is zero or blank, enter 0. And for any cost per equivalent unit computations, round your answers to 2 decimal places, okay? So we're dealing with the cutting department. And what I'm going to come down here and do is the first thing, your first step on your cost of production report is to figure out how many units need to be assigned cost, okay? So step 1, we need to calculate the units to be assigned cost. So inventory and process, well, they told us that, right? How many units are in beginning inventory? 1,400, very good. And then it asks, how many were received from the weaving department? They made this one even a little easier. Yeah, 58,000. They actually told us, you know, sometimes we have to calculate different things, but they just said materials added 58,000 from the weaving department. So this one they made a little bit easier. We didn't have to look at started and completed and all that. Okay. We will in a little bit. But right now, we have units to be assigned costs. We have the total units in the cutting department for the month of January, 59,400. Now, of those units, we want to know how many were in inventory and process, how many were started and completed, transferred to finished goods, and then our ending inventory. So when we break it down like this, you know, that's when we're going to step 2, calculate our equivalent units. That way we'll be able to assign costs to these different categories, okay? Well, again, let's do our whole units first, just so we understand that. Make that bigger. So again, our beginning inventory is just the 1,400, okay? The 1,400. And then we have to calculate started and completed. This is where we have to calculate that. So it did tell me up here, if I read up here, it tells me my finished goods. Goods finished during January, including goods in process, was 56,200. So they told us what we actually completed in the period, 56,200. So that's what was transferred to finished goods, 56,200. So in that case, how many did we start and complete? They gave it to us. Yeah, it's in the finished goods. What was transferred to finished goods. So how do I calculate what was started and completed? Yeah, we just subtract. Very good. We're going to take transferred to finished goods minus beginning inventory. Okay. So that would be what? 54,800. 54,800. So again, the reason behind this is what was transferred to finished goods. When we use FIFO method, we assume that the first units we started are the first ones sold. So we're assuming that all of our beginning inventory was sold in the period. And then we just needed to calculate how much was started and completed. That's kind of the why behind what we're doing there, okay? Since we're using FIFO method. And then they give us ending inventory, right? How much did we have in ending inventory? What's our work in process ending inventory units? 3,200, good. So then I just add what was transferred to finished goods and what's our ending inventory. And you should get the 59,400, which matches the units to be assigned costs. So that's the first step, is we calculate, our whole units. Well, from there, because we know we still have an ending inventory and we need to calculate equivalent units. So with FIFO method, with our beginning inventory, our equivalent units, we need to calculate how many more costs or how many more it would take to finish those. Okay, that's our purpose, equivalent units, beginning inventory. So under FIFO, we look at our beginning inventory and we say, well, we had 1,400 units. Well, how much more materials would it take to make the materials complete?
25%. Does it say 75 is complete?
That's where they trick you, right, with FIFO.
25, right?
Well, on direct materials, how are materials added into the process?
Yeah.
0. Remember, that's the tricky part. Materials are added 100%. So when in using FIFO, if there's beginning inventory, that material cost was added last period. Those materials were added in last month. Those are just ending materials that were carried over from last period. So using FIFO, materials were added already at 100%. So those costs for the 1,400 units for materials have no additional costs in this period. So if that doesn't make sense, just know in beginning inventory for materials, it's always 0 equivalent units for beginning inventory. It takes no more. We don't have to add any more materials. They're already 100% complete. Now for your conversion, you were right, Mila, they're 75% complete. So for conversion costs, it would take another 25% conversion to complete those 1,400 units. So again, you kind of always work backwards with inventory. You have to think how much costs were already added. So I just want to add costs to finish them. Okay, so materials are 100% complete, so it takes 0 more costs. Conversion costs were 75% complete, so I need to add 25% to make them 100%, just for beginning inventory. So we would take 1,400 times 25%, 350. Very good. So it would take 350 to complete. How about started and completed? How complete are those? It's whole, right? Yeah, they're started and completed. So those are 100% complete. So your equivalent units for started and completed is always the total amount, the 54,800. 54,800 for both materials and conversion. Bless you. Because they were started in this month, so all the costs were added this month. And since they were completed in this month, they're 100%. That one's the easy one, right? To do transfer to finished goods, you just add. Okay, so for materials, it's 54,800. And for conversion, it's what, 55,150? So we just add the columns for transfer to finished goods. And then for our ending inventory, how complete is ending inventory? What percent complete? 30, yeah. They just give that to us up here. Work in process, 3,200 units, 30% completed. So when we're assigning cost or equivalent units to ending inventory, we just use that 30%, okay? So the ending inventory is just 30%. How about materials? Is it 30%? That's where we get tricky again, right? How complete are materials? 100%. Very good. Remember, in ending inventory, when we've added in materials, we've added in all the material costs. So materials are in ending inventory always 100% equivalent units. So in materials, they're always 0% equivalent units in beginning inventory and 100% equivalent units in ending inventory. And again, this is because we added all the materials at the beginning of the process. That isn't always the normal assumption, but in this class, we're going to make it that way. Otherwise, it gets really confusing. Kayla will get to learn how to do it in cost accounting. She's so excited. And all of you other accounting majors who take cost and do that eventually. She's just doing it now. Not right now, though, at least. And then conversion costs, though, are 30% complete. So we would just take 3,200 times 30%. So 960.
Where did you get the 30%?
They gave that to us.
Oh, no. Work in process.
Uh-huh. Yeah, work in process ending inventory. So then we just add. So our total equivalent units for direct materials should be 54,800 plus 3,200, 58,000. 58,000. And then we add our two conversion costs, 55,150 plus 960, 56,110. Okay. So step 2 is calculating our equivalent units. That's the trickiest part. Okay. That's kind of the bulk of this chapter is remembering how to calculate equivalent units. The rest is just the tedious part. Step 3, you're calculating a cost per equivalent unit. So we just have to know, well, what was our total materials cost for January? Well, I look up here. These work in process costs right here, that was from last period, remember? So we don't have to worry about that. We just want to look at materials cost for this month. Well, that is $742,400. So they just give us that. We just want to look at the new cost this month. So direct materials cost for January, $742,400. And then we take our 58,000 equivalent units that we calculated. How do I calculate a cost per equivalent unit? Divide. Yeah, good. So what is my cost per equivalent unit for materials? Yeah, $12.80. Very good. So I just divided to get a cost per equivalent unit. That's the number we're going to use to assign costs in our beginning inventory, started and completed, and ending inventory. And we do the same for conversion costs. Well, what are my two conversion cost categories? What are conversion costs? Yeah, factory overhead and labor. So to get my total conversion costs, I just need to add direct labor plus factory overhead. Okay, conversion costs are labor and overhead. So I would add direct labor and factory overhead together, and you should get 286,161. 286,161. And then again, we're going to divide it by the total conversion equivalent units of 56,110. 56,110. So you should get $5.10 cost per equivalent unit. Okay. So now in the third step, we have calculated our cost per equivalent unit. Once we get that number, we just need to allocate costs to the different categories, okay? So in the first section, we need to calculate our total costs to account for, okay, our full total costs. So it asks for inventory in process. Well, they gave us that. Our beginning inventory costs were $22,960. Oops, missing a 2 there. 22,960. Cost incurred in January. Well, that's just my total cost for January. So I would add materials, $742,400, plus conversion of $286,161. Those are my costs for this period, right? That's all my January costs. So I add those two together, and that is $1,028,561. $1,028,561. 561. Then I just add those two together, clearly, right? That's an easy step to get total costs in the accounting, or in the cutting, sorry, in the cutting department. 1,051,521. 1,051,521. So those are the total costs in the cutting department, including work in process and everything added in. Well, that's all the costs. But we know some was in work in beginning inventory, some still in ending inventory. So those are the costs we're going to take and we're going to assign based on our cost per equivalent unit. We're going to say cost in beginning inventory, cost was started and completed, cost in ending inventory. So that's our last step to calculate or allocate the costs for completed and partially completed units. Okay. So inventory and process, the January 1 balance is again just your $22,960. Okay, so we're just carrying that cost down, $22,960. So that was my cost balance for work in process. To complete my work in process, well, that's when I kind of go back to my equivalent units. Okay, that's what I'm going to do here. For materials, my equivalent units for my work in process was 0. So 0 times $12.80 is 0, right? My 9-year-old can do that one. I know y'all can do better. That wasn't a dig. I was just saying she's learning multiplication. I didn't mean to be snarky. It just happened. Okay, yeah, it just happens, right? It's just like, yeah. She likes multiplication. She loves math. I'm like, thank God, one of the children loves math because we, it's like, it's all fun to help them with their homework. And then conversion. In conversion, we have to do a little scrolling. That's the only problem. To finish up our beginning inventory, we needed 350 equivalent units. So for that, what that means is I'm going to take 350 conversion units times the cost per equivalent unit of $5.10. Okay. And that would be 1,785. So to finish up completing those beginning inventory, it would take an additional $1,785. Okay. 1,785. So the cost of completed January 1 work in process, I just add those two together. 24,745. 24,745. Well, then I need to add in started and completed in January. Started and completed in January. Well, again, the equivalent units for both of those was the full amount, right? 100%. So the 54,800. So for materials, I take 54,800 times my cost per equivalent unit of $12.80. So my equivalent units for transferred to finished goods, 54,800 times my $12.80. Started and completed, sorry. Started and completed. So that is 701,440. 701,440. For conversion, started and completed is also equivalent units, 54,800. But I'm multiplying it by conversion cost of $5.10. So 58,400 times $5.10, 279,480. 279,480. So then I just add that row. So my total cost of started and completed units should be 980,920. 980,920. We're almost done. we want to calculate what was transferred to finished goods. Well, all of the beginning inventory plus what was started and completed. So I just add those two together. So I have 1,005,665. 1,005,665. And then last but not least, I want to know the cost to assign to ending inventory. Okay, so ending inventory, my equivalent units of materials for ending inventory are 3,200. So 3,200 EUs times $12.80 per EU. Ending inventory for materials, 40,960. 40,960. For conversion, I had 960 equivalent units times $5.10. 960 times $5.10, 4,896. And then the rest is just adding, right? We add the row to get our total inventory, ending inventory, 45,856. And then cost assigned, total cost assigned, we add those two together, 1,051,521. So again, when I look, I had total costs in the period. I calculated that 1,051,521. And I just assigned costs to my three different important categories. It's the same. So these two equal. Total cost accounted for, total cost assigned. So when those two equal, I know, well, hopefully I've assigned all my costs correctly based on my equivalent units. Any questions on that one? Do it.
Is this on the test?
Well, of course it's on the test. It's just broken down into steps. You won't be given this.
I'd rather have that.
You want this? I don't know that you'll have time. I'm like, if you want it, I'll give it to you. No, not the only question, just, you know, in addition. And then our last question, part B, just says compute and evaluate the change in the cost per equivalent unit for materials and conversion from the previous month. So this sounds a lot more complicated than it is. All we're looking at is materials. They told us at the very beginning in work in process, materials were $12.65. And now when we calculated it, we got $12.80. So what happened to the cost of materials? It increased. Very good. And by how much? 15 cents per unit. So that's all we're looking at there, just comparing what they gave us to our new costs. And then for conversion, they told us our costs were $5. Well, now they're $5.10. So we also saw an increase in just 10 cents. So every month, you know, we're calculating this again over and over again. Doesn't it sound fun? But we would look at this. We would look at these change in costs and try to figure out, you know, if that was a trend, if we were continuing to increase our production costs every month, we would want to analyze and investigate that, which we'll learn how to do in, you know, further chapters. But that's why this is so important, being able to calculate cost per unit and everything, because then we can compare it to past months and find out if we had an issue. All right.